Thyroid hormone regulates every single tissue in the body, regulates our genes, regulates mitochondrial function, the genesis of mitochondria, so everything really. I treat hyper and hypo the same way, same anti-inflammatory protocol. Tea grows in fluoride-rich soil. The reason why you have that acidic taste that people love, it comes from the fluoride that is in the soil where the tea plants are grown. Now, the highest rate of congenital hypothyroidism is in the areas where they grow tea. It's preventing the absorption of iodine, so you will get a goiter, you will have an inflamed thyroid, as will all the other tissues, not just the thyroid, fibrocystic breasts, inflamed prostate. Iodine is my shield. I do recommend the salt flush if you haven't done the iodine before. The parking spaces that the iodine is supposed to go into might be blocked by chloride, the bromide, the fluoride. I'm not worried about heavy metals. I'm not worried about toxins. I'm not worried about mold. I'm not worried about any of that because the iodine is my shield.
Dr. Bright, when somebody comes to see you with a chronic health condition, how often when you get in there and start unraveling the picture, do you find thyroid is in the mix?
Most times, because the thyroid hormone regulates every single tissue in the body. Regulates our genes, regulates mitochondrial function, the genesis of mitochondria, so everything really. But then, there's also adrenal function. You can't separate thyroid function from adrenal function, which is why I wrote that book about thyroid and adrenal function. You cannot separate the two. If anything goes wrong with either, the health issues that can manifest are myriad.
Well, let's talk about each of them specifically as an overview, and then tie together the connection between thyroid and adrenals.
Okay, so the thyroid is the first thing formed in the body before even the neural tube in the fetus. It's the maternal thyroid hormone that actually builds the fetus. And at 16 to 18 weeks, the fetus's thyroid is formed enough to produce hormone. But until that time, maternal thyroid is building the fetus. So starting with the neural tube, which becomes the brain, the spine, every part of the body. So that's why it affects every tissue, because it's right there with the formation of every single tissue and cell in the body. And the adrenals are connected because the thyroid uses the adrenals to express, because it's a sympathetic organ, right? Uses the central nervous system to send signals to the heart, for instance, the rate at which the heart beats, the rate at which the colon has peristaltic action, so that constipation is very commonly a symptom. How the rate at which your liver filters, the rate at which your kidneys filter. So you cannot separate them because the T3 sends messages via adrenergic stimulation, adrenal, to those organs and tell them what to do, when to do it.
Would you ever see somebody with just adrenal problems or just thyroid issues?
No, you can't separate them because they are both, both functions are decimated with stress. That could be physiological stress. That could be stress, lifestyle stress. So there was a book in the 80s written called Psychothyroidology, and an ology that never took off, right? Because, doctors didn't really want to focus on thyroid issues connected to mental health issues. That stress begets adrenal dysfunction and leads to thyroid dysfunction.
Okay, let's talk more about the thyroid hormones. When things are working correctly, talk about the different things produced there and their impact.
The thyroid produces 5 hormones, one of them being calcitonin, which regulates calcium levels in the body, with the parathyroid glands, which are embedded in the thyroid. And then there's T4, T3, T2, T1. They have a protein backbone and a halo of iodine molecules around the protein backbone. And those iodine molecules are cleaved off to make active hormones. So T4 is not active. It is produced predominantly, T4 is produced by the thyroid, a tiny bit of T3, a tiny bit of T2, and a tiny bit of T1. And then as needed in the tissues, an iodine molecule is cleaved off of the T4 so it can become active. T3 is active, T4 is not.
Talk about when things start to go awry, how that happens, and then how things break downstream.
Well, the reason for things going awry is also married. Stress can do it. Having a mother who is hypothyroid can do it. There won't be enough thyroid hormone to properly build the fetus, but also build the fetus's ability to respond to stress, physiological and lifestyle. There are plenty of substances that interfere that are goitrogens goitrogen, unfortunately, the word kind of is connected to goiter, which means that the thyroid expands to trap more iodine from the bloodstream. And these substances are so plentiful in our environment that whereas 200 years ago, you'd go to Bolivia or Switzerland or any mountainous region and you'd see more goiter. But nowadays, you can have thyroid issues, not necessarily goiter, because that's obvious. They catch that, right, usually. But you can have, as Maureen, who tested all the thousands of adolescents in Akron, Ohio, gave them 10 drops of iodine during adolescence to prevent the formation of goiter. That didn't affect how they did in school. It just made them not have goiter. So you kind of have to go beyond. Unfortunately, the medical vision is looking at goiter and not all the other tissues that the thyroid, the modern medical perspective. In the 1930s, sorry, I'm jumping around here. In the 1930s, all the doctors knew that thyroid affected everything and all illnesses. But then in the 70s and 80s, it became less so.
Since the thyroid does impact everything and it has such a central role here, what are the first signs and symptoms when there's dysfunction there?
All right, so I have noticed in my years of practice that adolescence is a huge, adolescence sticks out like a sore thumb. If there are any issues during adolescence, look to the thyroid, look to iodine levels, depression, eating disorders, anxiety. You don't have to have the malformation of sexual characteristics, which can also happen with low thyroid function. You can just have the inability to handle stress. But then you also, this is often, unfortunately nowadays, addressed with antidepressants and anxiety medication, which is why I read the second book, Good Fat is Good for Girls, to try to help parents head that off before that rears its head. So women evolve to have their period between 16 and 18. The human being formed its huge brain, and at the same time, in order to ensure that we, use that brain, and we had babies much fewer than we did before agriculture. Our endocrine system functioned properly when we build our sexual characteristics at a later age. Now, nowadays, it is not uncommon. It used to be called precocious puberty, but it is no longer uncommon to see menstruation in 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds. Which means that the endocrine system is busy building sexual characteristics far too young for there not to be a downstream effect, as you said, for menstruation, young adulthood, and eventually the rest of a person's life. And I'm specifically talking about females because females build more sexual characteristics than males. Obviously, they can also affect males. I have many adolescent young patients who are male, but treat through their parents. But, women and females have 3 to 4 more higher rate of thyroid issues than males.
Say somebody goes to their conventional doctor. The doctor is assuming there may be an issue with the thyroid. Let's talk about conventional testing and then switch over to yourself and what you do to test.
Okay, so I remember recently I spoke with someone and they said, I'm not hypothyroid, I'm not tired. So what people are looking for is either being metabolically unhealthy obesity, constipated, cold hands and feet, and tired all the time. So you look up all the, discussion of thyroid issues, and tired all the time is a thing that almost always comes up. But you can also not have that symptom, but have all the other symptoms and not recognize that. And this person was severely hypothyroid, had incredibly low numbers. So it often won't be diagnosed conventionally. It is often diagnosed during pregnancy, because pregnancy, you need really high rates of free T3, again, to build the fetus. And in their inadequate testing, it might come up. And most people put on levothyroxine during pregnancy, but then after pregnancy, they're usually taken off of it because they don't have the symptoms which are associated with hypothyroidism. Unfortunately, not enough symptoms are associated with them.
When it comes to lab testing, what do most conventional docs do?
Mostly they look at TSH, which is a mistake because that is pituitary hormone. That is a money issue. You test one thing, you think you figured it all out. TSH is basically irrelevant because you can have people with high TSH who have hypothyroid symptoms and people with low TSH who have hypothyroid symptoms. So, or normal TSH. The range is much too wide. Of course, we know the statistics are based on people who are not very healthy anyway. So, what are we going to, the ranges were compiled with a certain, demographic group that doesn't necessarily represent everybody. If you're lucky, free T4 will be tested. Again, that's inactive, or T4, total T3. So there you have to underline the fact that total T4 is attached to proteins. So, you're not measuring anything. Total T3 is attached to proteins to go around in the bloodstream. We know that proteins carry everything around in the bloodstream. For the same reason, you should test all steroid hormones with salivary testing, because also the steroid hormones are carried around in the bloodstream by proteins. I recommend testing free T3 and free T4. And if there's inflammation, if is a mixture of hyper and hypo symptoms, that usually means nodules and inflammation. Also testing the thyroid antibodies, antithyroid globulin, antithyroid peroxidase.
Okay, so we have the antibodies, free T4, free T3, and you mentioned doing salivary testing.
Cortisol.
That's for the cortisol.
Yeah, but I always do both. So I have a protocol. I don't have to see the antibodies because the protocol will not change. Antibodies are caused by inflammation. My protocol is to reduce inflammation. So most doctors will see antibodies and say, okay, we'll just keep an eye on it. Maybe we'll have to do something about it, meaning, nuke your thyroid. If there's a goiter, they say the same thing. We'll keep an eye on it. If it becomes malignant, we'll cut it out. Instead, what doctors used to do was address the inflammation, but also give the person natural desiccated thyroid, so the inflammation thyroid was not falling over itself and, with, scabs on his knees trying to produce this life essential hormone. And it could heal by not having to work so hard.
Okay, we're going to move into your protocol. But first, to get the full lay of the land here, let's talk about different conventional diagnoses when it comes to the thyroid. We've talked about a lot of different pieces here, but bring in hyper, hypo, autoimmune, so we can have a full understanding before we dive into your protocol.
Okay, so hypothyroid means your thyroid is unable to produce the necessary hormones for you to function optimally. Hyper means your thyroid is producing too much hormone, and you can have the symptoms of a hypermetabolic state, in the sense that you can have palpitations. Worst case, you can have, it's usually palpitations, maybe shaky hands. but the thyroid is overproducing because it's not functioning properly. I treat hyper and hypo the same way. Same anti-inflammatory protocol. Antibodies, that's your immune system kicking you in the butt. You have to approach it as an anti-inflammatory. You have to remove inflammation for your immune system not to overreact to you, because that's what antibodies are. Your immune system has gone from being immune and killing viral pathogens, bacterial pathogens, to killing you, to attacking you. So rheumatism, Sjögren's, MS, Hashimoto's, they all have the same root cause, inflammation. Your immune's asthma. Your inflammation has got to the point where your immune system can no longer recognize you from the bacteria and the viruses.
Okay, so we've talked about conventionally ablation of the thyroid, the T4 synthetic, Synthroid. Let's talk about in more detail, depending on what's going on with the thyroid, conventionally, what treatments look like.
If you have a nodule, they'll wait to look at it. If a cyst, it might get bigger because you're not removing inflammation. And if you have low numbers, if you have high TSH, if you're lucky enough, maybe they'll give you some levothyroxine, but that's not going to help you because levothyroxine is synthetic, and any synthetic molecule will not attach to the receptor's ligand. So the molecule is structurally, it seems the same, but it's not structurally the same. I go into it in detail in my book. The same goes for HRT. Those molecules do not attach to the receptors. So you're basically taking nothing. The other problem with levothyroxine is that it does not convert into T2 and T1. That conversion doesn't happen. So the TSH levels go down. So the person is no longer considered having primary hypothyroidism, but they haven't really looked at the free T3, right? We cannot look at the T2 and the T1 yet properly, but they're not going to convert. It's not going to convert, so nobody will feel better.
Okay, to summarize here, we're testing the wrong thing with TSH. Using a synthetic, we're treating it, bringing the TSH down, so the doctor will check off we're making progress.
Correct.
But it's actually not fixing you, and you're not going to feel great.
Correct. And the other, if you've been diagnosed with hyperthyroidism, you could have low TSH, and they don't test your free T3 and free T4 even, right? I've seen that many, many times. They give you methanazole, which was derived from cabbage leaves, which, this farmer saw his patch of rabbits with goiters. So it prevents the synthesis of iodine. It prevents the thyroid's ability to synthesize iodine. So methanazole prevents you from absorbing iodine in your thyroid. You'll eventually have an inflamed thyroid anyway, because that's its job. It needs iodine. So that's not a really good way to do it either.
And then if the thyroid's destroyed with radioactive iodine or removed, do they just give the Synthroid at that point?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very rarely can you get, so people in their 60s and 70s may have a prescription for Armour because up until a few years ago, it was more common. So 10 years ago, that's what you got. That was the gold standard of treating hypothyroidism. More and more difficult. Obviously, the FDA just came out and said that they're going to make it a biologic, so it makes it much more expensive to produce by the factories because it comes from an animal. It comes from an animal. We are animals. So the pig thyroid is exactly, is the same production as our thyroid, but, they want us to take a synthetic. Then yes, that will not make you feel better.
Let's stick on the NDT. So this can be a good thing, part of your protocol for some. We want to make sure we're getting the pig thyroid versus cow. Explain the difference there.
There's a huge ratio of T4 to T3 in bovine thyroid. So the pigs produce the same ratio of T4, T3, T2, and T1. So it's not hard for you to convert. Your tissues can convert that T4 into the T3 as needed in the body. So if you have a ton of T4, it's not going to be converted into T3 that you need. That's the problem with bovine, which is easily available as a supplement, but shouldn't be.
Is the pig more common? Is Armour always pig?
Armour is always pig because in 1890 they decided, we can cure people with this. Let's make it a pharmaceutical. So it comes from a pig. It's a pharmaceutical, and it is pharmaceutically. It's measured right. The cow is a supplement.
Okay, so for the pig, you have to go to your doctor,
or you buy it elsewhere because there are other ways to get it because it is so difficult to get.
Talk about the T1 and T2. Before reading your new book, I wasn't even aware of these. Typically, they're not talked about. Talk about their role.
Well, T2 and T1, we know, have something to do with cardiovascular system. Probably T2 has something to do with the rate at which the heart beats, because people thought that it would give you energy. People who go to the gym started popping synthetic T2, thinking it would give them higher performance in the gym. That's not going to work because it's synthetic anyway. However, T1, we still don't know exactly what it does, but it is there. So there's still a lot to learn about what the thyroid does. You can't just assume that everything's TSH and T4 because that's all they test. They're not testing T2 and T1.
Bottom line, though, if we get the Armour, the pig thyroid, we're going to get T1, T2, T3, T4, and calcitonin.
Exactly.
Okay, so NDT, how do you determine if you're working with somebody, whether or not that's part of the protocol?
If they have horrifically low T4 and T3 levels, that's going to be part of the protocol. It may not be forever, but that, you see, they cannot heal. Thyroid hormone is a healing hormone, not T4 because it's inactive. But the other ones, T3, T2, T1, they are healing hormones. They are regenerating tissue. So you will, and also if your thyroid is inflamed, as I said before, you can't fix your thyroid if you're not allowing it to take a break. It is there pumping out thyroid hormone, trying its best to make you live and function optimally. If you take some from the outside, that inflammation, those cysts, those nodules can heal because your thyroid is falling over itself, trying to produce hormone for you.
So you've already mentioned the fact that if somebody is going through your protocol, no matter the thyroid issue, it's always the same, which is great because it simplifies. What about adrenals? Is that just part of the protocol encompassed within what we're talking about today? They'll heal as well?
Well, if a person has been undiagnosed with hypothyroidism for a long time, their adrenals are going to be shot in the sense that cortisol goes up automatically if you're hypothyroid. It's also a metabolic hormone. It's also a hormone that regulates body temperature. So cortisol will go up in order to take the place of thyroid hormone, but also if you're hypothyroid, you're in a stress state. So I usually test it because you've been in a stress state by being hypothyroid, and nobody gets to where they are without having had to abuse their adrenals inadvertently. They're physiologically abuse their adrenals.
In your book, you talk about natural adrenal extracts. How often is that part of the protocol?
It depends. So if you have an autoimmune issue, it's part of the protocol because they were giving adrenal extracts for the Spanish flu, for asthma. I've given it for asthma. It is something that will boost your immune system in the sense that there's no cortisol in it. It's just a raw material to make your pituitary turn back the production of cortisol. So, but the pituitary, if you're in a stress state, will switch off ACTH, which is what tells the adrenals to make cortisol. There's nothing wrong with the adrenals. Very rarely is there anything wrong with the adrenals. But if cortisol is high for chronically, the body will switch off, the pituitary will switch off the production of cortisol via ACTH. Because just like cortisone shots, high cortisol is very inflammatory. I mean, that burns brain tissue. It makes, pulverizes bone. So I test both.
Okay. And a key part of the messaging here is we got to bring the stress down
Yes.
for the cortisol and obviously overall health.
Yes. Yes.
And later on, I want to get to some of the things people may be doing thinking they're healthy that are actually causing cortisol to go up.
Mm-hmm.
But before that, we've talked about NDT. There's 3 parts to your protocol. There's also iodine supplementation
Mm-hmm.
and the high-fat carnivore diet. So let's move into the diet piece. Why would somebody want to eat that way to help heal what we're talking about?
Because that's what we evolved to eat, number one. Number two, cholesterol is anti-inflammatory. So if you have any inflammation, that's a way to reduce inflammation. And number three, that's what our steroids are made out of. So people are being sent off to test their serum levels of estrogen and progesterone and testosterone, which is ridiculous because they're attached to protein. So what number are you going to get? And then they're put on synthetics, which is ridiculous because they're not going to attach to the receptors. So if you look at the hormone cascade, which I put in the book, the adrenal hormone cascade, you see that all those steroid hormones come from animal fat, which is cholesterol, not from MCT oil, not from, avocado oil, only from cholesterol, animal fat. And then the synthesis of each of these hormones is dependent upon T3, because T3 decides how much estrogen that tissue needs, how much progesterone that tissue needs. And this is the same in both male and female. 90% of the steroid hormone production is made in the adrenal glands.
Well, let's get practical and talk about what this diet looks like. And I think the best way to do that is talking about what you eat. So in a typical day, when will you eat and what will you eat?
I have a high-fat breakfast. I have decaf coffee with 25 to 50 grams of fat, butter or tallow, and an egg yolk. Egg yolk because we like the froth. My husband and I, we live in Italy, like the froth. So that's my breakfast. Then I go paddleboarding if it's not too wavy. And then lunch is a steak, but I'm sure I'll have a snack mid-morning. And then another snack probably. I mean, that's because I'm very active. I see many people during the day. I do a lot of walking. I'm very active. And dinner is going to be a steak with added fat. Sorry.
Okay, a couple pieces here that fit in with the stress that I wanted to make sure we brought in. You're not fasting, you're eating in the morning, and you're snacking, which a lot of people in our world are fasting, and they're saying no snacks. So bring those in, tie them into the stress piece and why you're doing that.
I think my life is pretty stressful now. And I'm talking about snacking a little piece of jerky with maybe 10 grams of fat. I want to balance my blood sugar. I used to do a lot of sparring. I was a Kung Fu master. I'm still a Kung Fu master, but I don't, teach anymore. I don't do the sparring. So I had to stop exercising for 2 years. And now I'm very happy doing what I'm doing. But I think that to keep I'm going to be 63 in 3 months. I'm deathly afraid of Alzheimer's. So I want to keep my blood sugar very stable and balanced and make sure that I have the energy to get about my day. I mean, snacking, if you're talking about a little tiny piece of fat, it's balancing my blood sugar. If I'm out, I don't need to eat. I mean, fasting is something that humans are able to do because we won't die from starvation. So I can be out for 8 hours, not eat.
But talk about specifically why you're against fasting. Say somebody's working with you, they have a thyroid issue. You're going to tell them to eat in the morning because that's causing stress that's going to work against them.
Right, because cortisol, so if you look at the cortisol circadian rhythm, cortisol is high in the morning. That's when it peaks between 6 and 9. There's a buffer there. You have a huge reservoir. That's when you're supposed to exercise. at that time. Around noon, it starts to go down. So I have a high fat breakfast because you could almost say an only fat breakfast because how much protein is in an egg yolk? 2 milligrams, 2 to 4 milligrams. Because I want to have the energy and be able to back up support that high level reservoir of cortisol in the morning. If you fast, you raise your cortisol levels, your blood sugar, you'll be performing gluconeogenesis. So you won't be in ketosis because your liver is going to be putting out sugar because you're stressed, because you're fasting. So you're doing it to lose weight. It's not going to work. It may work for a time, but it won't work without drawbacks. I used to fast as a teenager to lose weight, and it worked for a while, and then it didn't work anymore because my body I was at the age of having children, and my body was like, heck no, you're not going to mess up your hormones by fasting because we need you just in case you get pregnant to be able to have a healthy child.
You've touched on exercise, but let's go deeper into that and why exercising at the right time and doing the right exercise works for you, and how if you're not doing that correctly, you can be spiking cortisol.
Okay, so absolutely, I believe in exercise. I believe in weight training because muscles are very healthy, not because they're more metabolic, but because, if you fall, you bounce if you have muscles, literally. So my mom was hypothyroid, not properly medicated, and she broke her hip in like 11 places. Had to be airlifted out of Alpine, Texas to a hospital. Her bones were very fragile. She had no muscle tone. So muscle tone is good for you to be protected. My husband is a bicycle rider, used to be a racer. I've pushed him to go to the gym to work on muscle tone because what he does is just catabolic, riding his bicycle. And I'm petrified he's going to be, fall off his bike. Tying drivers are insane, and break his shoulder. So he is building upper body, and cyclists are usually all legs and no upper body. So weight training is great. Don't think of cardio. Just don't think of cardio. That was invented when they took our fat away, when they told us there used to be ads in the 80s for energy to eat sugar. Literally, I have those ads. I found them. I researched them. They took our fat away. We needed energy. So they started telling us to eat sugar. And then people got heavier and they put them on the treadmill. Exercise used to be work. Didn't used to exist.
To be clear, you're still a fan of walking. And for you like your paddleboarding. Mm-hmm. The way I understand it, it's just because these are gentle enough that they're not causing that stress response.
Yeah. If your heart is raised for 10 minutes, you're going to raise cortisol levels. That's it. So you could maybe do a sprint, stop completely, walk, a sprint, stop completely, walk. But other than that, even that, if somebody has an autoimmune condition, I'm going to say no exercise because your immune system is wary. It's constantly thinking you're in danger. So it will react to the slightest thing. Like it might even react to a food that for other people is fine, like egg white. A lot of people react to egg white when they have a very sensitive immune system.
Okay, so coming back to our bad stressors that people often think are good, fasting, over-exercising. The last couple I want to touch on in that realm, ice baths and saunas. You're not a fan of those either.
Yeah, they raise cortisol. So extremes, Jesse, think extremes. If it's an extreme, it's going to raise your stress level. So humans, we lived in tribes, we went hunting for a bit and we lay around the campfire, ate some dried meat, made some beads, drew some pictures on walls, went hunting again. We were smart. We had spears. We didn't have to run after these animals. From afar, we saw them and we killed them. So our stress levels were completely different than modern, the modern humans. So yes, if it causes stress, it's going to raise cortisol levels. And that could be a lifestyle, that could be an argument, that could be all kinds of stuff. All of these things will raise cortisol levels. Your body will not know if the treadmill, the marathon, the fight with your partner, the war, the famine, it won't know the difference. It will just raise cortisol levels.
Let's come back to your breakfast, which is this fatty coffee, decaf. You put an egg yolk in it, animal fat. How do you go about making it?
So if, coffee's hot, and I add the fat, and then I use a NutriBullet, which my youngest daughter turned me on to. Boom, boom. So it is cooled by this time, mixing the fat, blending the fat with the decaf. And then I add the egg yolk and I blend it again. So had I put the egg yolk in at the same time with the fat, it would curdle. It's the heat that changes, just like, you have to cook custard on a low fire because the protein in the egg yolk changes, the shape of it changes. So that's why you avoid the heat.
Okay, so the egg yolk comes later. For animal fat, is it always either tallow or butter?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so that cools down enough. You put the egg yolk in. It doesn't make like a scrambled egg in your coffee at that point because it's cooled down. I'm intrigued by this. I haven't tried it, but I'm going to give it a whirl.
It's really good.
And to highlight another stress that you're avoiding is you're doing decaf coffee because, again, if we're having too much caffeine, that raises the cortisol again, correct?
Absolutely. So I once had a patient who had to smoke a cigarette, have a bowel movement on the toilet. Nicotine was a stimulant. Any stimulant is going to, so any substance, heroin, cocaine, marijuana, saunas, ice baths, alcohol, caffeine, all of these, sugar, all of these are stimulants and they will raise cortisol levels.
Sugar, another important one to add.
Yeah. Stimulants.
Okay, so moving into the rest of the day, you're a big fan of ruminant animals, but no dairy.
No dairy, yeah, because...
So talk, about the dairy piece, and then I want to move into the red meat.
Okay, so yeah, I'm eating butter. The issue with dairy is casinomorphins. So, I don't have an autoimmune condition. If a person has an autoimmune condition, they should stay away from dairy because it's inflammatory. Because humans did not evolve to eat dairy, lots of dairy, because of the casinomorphins. If you could get, breast milk cheese, that would be great, but you can't. You're getting it from a cow, so it is a foreign substance to your body. Now, if you don't react, then maybe it's not an issue. You've removed every other inflammatory food, but you know that for Hashimoto's, the casinomorphins, those proteins and the gluten proteins are inflammatory. Maybe not for everybody, but for many people they are.
Any reason you stick with butter versus ghee?
I don't feel like making the ghee myself, so I don't think that if you're getting something that was made in an industrial vat with a guy with a hairnet on, I think that's a little bit far removed from natural. The butter I can just get fresh. If I make the ghee myself, which is very easy, you just have to skim the little bit of lactose and tiny bit of milk protein that rises to the top. But I kind of, I'm fine with butter.
Right. You're a fan. You're just simplifying.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about why ruminant animals for you are at the top of the pyramid and talk about the hierarchy underneath that, how you look at different animal products.
So ruminant, as I say, they eat the grass for us, right? So there's there's nothing else that has as much iron. I would say the nutritional package is just better than anything else, and fat. So fish is great, no fat. Salmon really doesn't have any fat compared to beef or lamb. Seafood is great, but it doesn't have any iron. I think that it's something that I don't think you have to only eat the ruminant. I think that if you have inflammation, you only eat the ruminant until you are better. And then you start adding things. That's what I tell people to do. Every 4 days, you add a different animal. I mean, in Australia, they eat kangaroo, which is a ruminant. I didn't know that after a while, so they eat grass. It depends on where you live, but the next stage would be, so I put ruminant, and then after that, people want to add chicken, but chickens are born bug eaters, right? They're supposed to eat insects. The chickens that we get don't eat insects. So there's a higher omega-6 content. The pork we get has a higher omega-6 content. So that's why if there's inflammation or any autoimmune condition, I don't recommend those carnivore foods initially.
Since you're such an advocate for high fat, whether it be a ruminant animal or otherwise, how do you feel about adding things like the butter and tallow on top of that to bring that fat percentage up even more?
Oh, that's what I do. That's what I need. That's what I tell people to do.
So you always do that?
You can't get to 80-20 for a female or 70-30 for a male without adding the tallow or the butter. You can't do it because it's going to be 60-40. There's not enough fat. I mean, in Italy, there's no fat on any animal because they kill them at 16 months. In America and other countries, they let them live, they live longer in order for them to age and have some fat on them. But people here are so afraid of fat that there's no fat. So I have to add it on.
Given the way you're eating, I assume you're always in ketosis. But how do you look at ketones as being part of this whole healing picture?
Absolutely, they are the healing picture. So that's the better fuel to burn. I don't want to get Alzheimer's. Too many family members had Alzheimer's. I got 3 children, grandson. So I don't want to put them through that. Ketosis is the best metabolic state. There's glycolysis and there's ketosis. You're burning, if you eat too much protein, you're also going to be in glycolysis because excess protein will turn into glucose. Fat will never turn into glucose. So it's an excellent way to balance blood sugar, and ketones are the best way to get energy. Your liver obviously makes some cholesterol, but not enough in our high stress world.
Okay, so you're having meat as the foundation of the diet, adding extra fat. What about salt and other spices? How do you feel about those?
I eat a ton of salt, so I have to have a teaspoon of salt in the morning when I go paddleboarding. In ketosis, you need salt, minimum of 5 grams a day, because carbohydrates make you retain water. In ketosis, that retained water goes away, so you need salt. With water, you lose salt if you don't, So a carnivore absolutely needs salt, not just salt in your food in many cases. If you have adrenal and thyroid issues, you're going to have light cramps at night. So salt can mitigate that until you fix the other issues.
How do you feel about different kinds of salt? Is there any specific hierarchy there?
Not iodized salt and not bleached salt. Those are no good. So iodized salt is contaminated with sodium iodide, which is a really crappy, cheap form of iodine. And bleached salt is no longer an electrolyte. So where I live, you can only get pink Himalayan salt. I don't have access to Celtic or Nigerian or Redmond's, or, I don't have access to that. But I know that it's a full panel, as you'd say. It's an electrolyte. I don't have to take electrolytes because they're in my salt.
All right, let's use the iodized salt as a segue into iodine. This is an area I want to make sure we go deep into. Why is this something people need to be supplementing with in the modern world?
Because too many substances prevent the absorption of iodine in the modern world. Oatmeal, PFAs, fluoride, halides, bromide, chloride, they prevent the absorption of iodine. And not only your thyroid needs iodine, your the breasts in females, uterus, ovaries need a good 5 milligrams each, and the prostate in males needs iodine, and the adrenals use a ton of iodine. So I have a paper from I think it's 1937, where they measured all the iodine content of each organ. Iodine, one drop is not going to cut it, because the thyroid by itself just takes 6 milligrams. 15/5% iodine, one drop is 6.25 milligrams. Your thyroid needs that. What about the rest of the body?
All right, for somebody brand new to supplementing with it, how do they begin?
I'd start with a minimum of 2 to 4 drops of 5%. You put it in water, or you can put it in gelatin cap like we do, and and you drink a lot of water with that. I do recommend the salt flush if you haven't done the iodine before, because you can be contaminated with the parking spaces that the iodine is supposed to go into might be blocked by, those guys who take the parking space. Chloride, the bromide, the fluoride. So number one, the iodine won't go into the cells. And number two, you may have side effects of iodine, toxicity, halide toxicity rather, if your iodine can't go in to your system. Very rare though.
Okay, say this is day one. They have their sea salt and their iodine. How do they do this salt protocol and begin supplementing?
All right, so the salt flush, you have a little glass with half teaspoon of salt. You've already taken your 2 drops of iodine. You chug that salt and water, and then you have a normal glass, I guess 8 ounces of water, and you do that repeatedly every half hour until you have to urinate. So the halides attach to the salt and are carried out of the system.
Okay, so half a teaspoon of salt, you have that in a bit of water, chase that with another glass of water, do that every half hour until they urinate, and then they're done that for the day?
For a week, yeah, for the day. You do that for a week.
Got it. And as an ongoing maintenance thing, is the salt protocol part of that?
Only if you swim in pools regularly. I mean, what I do regularly is I up my iodine when I travel, or, we go to Scotland half the year and all of a sudden it's cold and I might up the iodine for a week. But I haven't repeated it, but I never swim in pools. So, if you swim in pools, I would repeat it. Maybe, every couple of months. It's just salt and iodine.
So anytime you're going to be exposed to halides, you could do it as kind of a reset?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so they're starting the iodine, you said, before they do the salt protocol for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to continue the iodine for life at that point, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Everybody needs it.
Okay, you talked about the 5% and 15%. Depending on if you're in the UK, it'll likely be 15. Over in the US, it's 5. Talk about the discrepancy there.
Jean-Luc Gault invented the 15%. He called it 15% because it's 10% potassium iodide and 5% organic iodine crystals. That's the original recipe from 1827. So when it was sold commercially, it was always 15%. But in America, when iodine, probably after the Wolff-Chaikoff effect, I don't know, J. Crow's hides a 5% link anyway. They just sell 2%. I mean, they sell 5%, but they hide the link. And Amazon definitely only sells the 2%. But the UK still calls it 15%. So it's just that it was made less scary sounding by talking about the organic iodine and not totaling it with the potassium iodide. It sounded like less iodine.
Got it. So the product's the same. It just sounds less intense in the US.
Yeah.
So as we're talking about this salt protocol, getting rid of the halides that are on the receptors with that, what's the affinity of binding like for fluoride, bromide, different halides versus iodine?
These are not needed by the body. So I would say the affinity for, once you've done the salt flush and you're taking iodine regularly, it's not like you have to worry so much about your exposure to halides. I mean, I wouldn't go brushing my teeth with fluoride toothpaste or getting your teeth cleaned with fluoride. It's confusing because they're so alike in molecular structure that your cells will be like, oh, I don't know what you are. Come in.
But from your research, does one halide bind easier than others?
I would say since we need iodine, the iodine would bind easier once you remove the confusing other halides. So, fluoride is really new. People in Bolivia and Switzerland had goiter in the 1800s, and they didn't have fluoride mouthwashes, and they didn't have, right? These are substances that are in rocks. Humans figured out how to extract those substances and make Mountain Dew yellow with bromide. So what we're naturally absorbing is going to be iodine.
But once the iodine's there in the receptors, it has a good affinity and can keep a lot of the other halides out.
Absolutely.
Where is iodine from? You mentioned rocks. Where do they get the supplement?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I don't exactly know. I used to make it myself. You just have to get the organic iodine crystals and make sure that you know what to look for in forms that are not, obviously rocks are mixed with other things, right? Just like they say, this may contain peanut particles. So I'm sure that where you're getting it from, they're making it from places where the iodine crystals are pure.
So you're a fan of Lugol's. What about other forms people can find online, like nascent iodine?
It's potassium iodide. It has to be dark brown. It has to be almost black brown. That means it has organic iodine crystals in it. If it's clear and light brown, it's not going to. Some tissues prefer the organic crystals to the potassium iodide. So you want to be sure you have both. The potassium iodide makes it soluble in water. That's why the brilliant thing that Jean Lugol did was everybody needed iodine, but he mixed it with potassium iodide and distilled water so that it would turn into a liquid that somebody could take.
Any reason you put it in capsules? Is it just the taste?
Most of the taste, and if you have a lot of plaque, it's going to stain the plaque. Iodine vaporizes very easily. So even our kitchen, we have our iodine, but we just moved to this place, so we don't have any bookshelves. That's why the books are everywhere. But iodine, you can close the bottle as tight as possible, but there'll be a patch around your bottle that's a bit brown because it does come out pretty easily. That's why iodine salt is so bad, because poof, you open it and it comes out.
Since salt is sodium chloride, chloride being a halide, any issue there with salt interfering with iodine?
No.
What about other uses for iodine? Burns, cuts, topically?
Yes. It's great for the skin. I would mix it. I tell people to mix it with tallow, apply to sores, herpes sores, rashes, mosquito bites. It regenerates skin, makes skin regenerate faster, wounds heal faster. A salt pipe, using an empty iodine bottle, adding a little bit of salt and adding a couple of drops of iodine keeps me from ever getting any respiratory infection. Painting breasts, if you have fibrocystic breasts, the cysts regress. Douching, if you have cysts or fibroids in uterus and the ovaries.
Come back to the salt pipe piece. What exactly is that? And when specifically would somebody want to use it?
Whenever you have a cold or throat infection or sinus infection, it's really magical. I mean, I have a bottle that's a salt pipe that we redo every couple of days because it does, we're inhaling it, but it also comes out. We travel with both. Always travel with both our iodine and the salt pipe.
Okay, and talk about the reaction there of the salt and the iodine.
The salt is vaporizing the iodine. I was really sick when we went to Scotland in April. And I literally carried that thing in my coat pocket so I could inhale 2 or 3 times a day. And I mean, sick in the sense that I was getting a scratchy throat. I never take anything other than the iodine. I did that enough so I didn't have to take anything. The scratchy throat was gone, and infection was. Iodine is an antiviral, antibacterial, and heavy metal chelator. So anything bad that's coming at you is going to be, it's your shield against all these things that are infectious, and it's going to boost your immune system. Your adrenals use a ton of iodine. The adrenals are your immune system.
Given that salt makes iodine evaporate, why would they have chose that for a medium salt, iodized salt, as something to carry iodine to help with goiters?
Well, I guess if they didn't want to use Lugol's, they wanted some, because everybody used salt. Everybody uses salt in cooking. You know, the old story about the guy, king had 3 daughters, and 3 of them gave him a gift. All of them gave him a gift. And the daughter that loved him most gave him salt, and he banished her from the kingdom. And then he realized when he ate food that had no salt in it, oh my God, you're the one who really loves me. Salt is much more prevalent than Lugol's was. I mean, Lugol's was very prevalent, but it's sort of a no-brainer. You can get salt to people much more easily than you could get Lugol's to everybody. Like they had, like iron deficiencies in some places in Africa, they would add those cast iron fish when they would make stews so that some of the iron would come out into the food.
The point I'm making, though, wouldn't a lot of that iodine be lost as vapor because they're using salt?
It is absolutely gone. It's gone. There is no, and it's kind of slap in the face to the tissues that need the iodine. This little tiny bit of iodine walks in to your system, and your thyroid says, I need way more than that. Poof, I'm going to, develop a goiter.
What about kids? How early can a parent start to introduce iodine?
Mothers who are nursing will be giving iodine to the newborn. And then after that, hopefully they will nurse to 1 or 2. And then 1 or 2 one drop of iodine is sufficient.
Okay, so 1 drop once nursing is done. Any ways to get that into kids? Because it's not a bad taste, but it has a distinct taste, we'll say.
Yeah.
How can a parent get that into the diet of a child in a easy way?
Well, don't cook with it because it'll disappear if you're cooking with it. I have people put it on meat. You can just drop a drop on a piece of meat or other foods. Wouldn't put it in orange juice because that's very sugary, but it's also vitamin C. Vitamin C is an anti-iodine. Just tuck it into the food. It does taste pretty bad for kids.
So I want to highlight here, we don't want to heat it. That will destroy the iodine.
Yeah, it'll vaporize it.
What about pets?
Sorry, if you think about cooking with salt, iodized salt, forget that. There's no iodine in that at all.
And you don't want to put it in hot drinks?
No, the whole coffee and iodine thing. I don't know where that came from.
What about pets? Somebody tuned in to how important this is now. Cats, dogs, other pets. How do you feel about including that for them?
Cats and dogs, absolutely. The cases, the rate of hypothyroidism in cats and dogs has skyrocketed because of the crap we feed them. And if they're carnivore pets, I don't think it's an issue. They're not eating things that are preventing the absorption of iodine. I had a dog. My current dog is carnivore and is absolutely great, has no issues. We did have a dog who had an ear infection. He had those long floppy ears, and we put a lot of iodine, or put some iodine in his water in order to fight that infection.
For somebody that has their thyroid removed, wondering whether or not they should be using iodine or changing up dosage, talk to them.
They need natural desiccated thyroid. If they don't have a thyroid, there's no way the iodine is going to be turned into thyroid hormone. They need naturally desiccated thyroid, and their iodine that they take goes to their other tissues that desperately need iodine, but the thyroid's gone. So they need to have those 5 hormones that are naturally occurring in the pig thyroid.
Right, but honing in on iodine, still of use. Is the dosage the same?
Yes. There's so much stuff. I mean, the iodine is my shield. I'm not worried about heavy metals. I'm not worried about toxins. I'm not worried about mold. I'm not worried about any of that because the iodine is my shield. So any excess comes out in your urine, you need the iodine. Your body will decide. It's a mineral. It's like saying, how much water do you need? You don't need those huge bottles. You need it when you're thirsty, usually, but we do definitely need some water every day. So excess coming out in your urine, you have a few drops and ensure that all the tissues that want it will get it.
Talk more about the elimination through the urine, because there is a lot of fear around this supplement.
Yeah.
Do you ever see people taking too much in the body, not knowing what to do with it?
No. I wouldn't drink a bottle because it's corrosive. It'll hurt your throat. Somebody who has a thyroid nodule might wake up their thyroid in the sense that the nodule exists because the person was iodine deficient anyway. So if you have palpitations after taking iodine, it's either the halide toxicity or you have an inflamed thyroid. You need the iodine. You just have to go more slowly and definitely do the salt flush.
For somebody currently drinking tea, let's talk about what this is doing to the thyroid.
It's preventing the absorption of iodine, so you will get a goiter. You will have an inflamed thyroid, as will all the other tissues, not just the thyroid. Fibrocystic breasts, uterine, ovarian fibers, inflamed prostate.
Why is that? Talk more about what's happening with tea and the fluoride.
Tea grows in fluoride-rich soil. The reason why you have that acidic taste that people love, it comes from the fluoride that is in the soil where the tea plants are grown. Now, the highest rate of congenital hypothyroidism is in the areas where they grow tea. So I did research on this in China, in India, and in Ireland, which is one of the countries where they drink the most tea, and the rocks there have a lot of fluoride anyway. So it's a huge issue.
Okay, tea aside, any other food and drinks that have fluoride in them we want to be aware of?
Not necessarily fluoride, but they prevent the synthesis of iodine, which would be oatmeal, cassava, sweet potatoes, flax seeds. I have a list of them and the medications in my book, Good Fat is Good for Girls. Lots of them, many.
So it's obvious you're not into plants. We have to get those out of the diet. What about somebody right now tuning in on a vegan diet? What's that doing to the thyroid?
Well, they're not going to be able to have heme iron. So the thyroid needs zinc, magnesium, iron. It needs all the nutrients that are in meat to function properly. And they'll be in a stress state because they won't be having any animal fat. So none of the other plant fats are ever going to make steroid hormones. Yes, not good for the thyroid or anything else in the body being vegan.
What about this talk of olive oil being a health food? And then also underneath that, often avocado oil, coconut oil. Obviously, you're a fan of animal fat, but even people in the carnivore world may be using those in and out with animal fats. So talk about why even these quote unquote healthy oils, animal fats are superior.
Well, you can't make a steroid hormone out of olive oil or coconut or avocado oil. That's my problem. So if you're getting enough animal fat and you want to eat some lettuce, which is just chlorophyll, it's not going to hurt you. There's nothing in lettuce, really. And you want to pour some extra virgin olive oil on it, that's fine if you don't have an autoimmune issue and you need to fix it. So eventually you can have your salad with olive oil, but I don't think it's going to be harmful, but it's never going to make hormones. Now, the Greeks ate meat. They used the olive oil as lighter fluid. They did not eat the olive oil. So now the countries where I was living in southern Italy, there used to be, animals, and now it's all olive trees. There's absolutely nothing but olive trees and wine, grapes. So humans have changed. It's you make more money off of olive. It's easier to produce a bunch of olive oil and send it to America, and they'll pay for it rather than butchering an animal and giving it to a few families in the area.
Somebody adopting this protocol, high-fat carnivore diet, iodine, NDT if necessary, how quickly can they expect to start to feel better if they're suffering right now with a thyroid or adrenal issue?
A thyroid is pretty quick, but you have to fix the adrenal as well. So the adrenals, because there's nothing wrong with the adrenals. If you're taking NDT, you're giving your body the thyroid hormone it needs. But the adrenals, it's not like the adrenal cortex extract will eventually, after a few months, turn the pituitary back on. But the production of cortisol, but it takes a lot longer. It can take several months. Whereas the thyroid, you can get your levels up in a few weeks.
Since you're such an advocate for decreasing the stress, letting the body heal, how does sleep fit into this? If you're working with somebody, how do you make sure they're optimizing that pillar?
Well, lights out, with the circadian rhythm after, sundown or 6 to 8 p.m., we should be putting our phones away and not being on the computers and avoiding, I don't have blue light blockers. I just don't go near any of these things after sundown. They shouldn't be exercising at night. They should not be eating at 4 and not eating until the next day, because then they're going to be, the liver is going to make sugar in the night if you're hungry. And I definitely recommend people who are healing and trying to reduce stress and anxiety to have a little bit of fat before bed. A lot of people wake up in the night, have a little bit of fat when you wake up in the night, you go to sleep a lot more easily.
For somebody like you that's optimized their thyroid and adrenals, having fat before bed, is that still something you do?
I do, to ensure that I'm going to sleep well and deeply. I do a little bit, teaspoon of fat at bedtime. But I'm a very sympathetic, maybe 20 years ago, you'd say I was high strung. My brain is firing in all, cylinders a lot during the day, concentrating a lot. I just finished the book. So for me, it's just very calming.
So we've talked about tea. We want to avoid that. What other toxins in the modern world are having a negative impact on the thyroid?
Everything. But again, if you optimize your function, you reduce stress. You can't run up to the hills and live you could, and many people do, but I'm not doing that. I have my iodine shield, and I am addressing stress as much as possible. I've actually, that's why I've joined up with a Steak and Butter Gal to see more people, fewer hours, because I do want to spend more time with my grandson. So there are things that you can do if you can to mitigate stress and optimize your well-being. I happen to live in a sunny place. If I lived in Scotland's not sunny. Well, the light is out there for a long time, but it's rainy and cold. I feel great there too. So, doesn't, I think that we have to do the best we can. We cannot remove all stressors from our lives. We cannot. All we can do is lower the stress by eating the right way and removing substances and things that are going to cause stress. We can't stop working. We can't stop hearing there are no garbage trucks here, but I remember in the U.S., the garbage trucks rolling around 5 o'clock in the morning. We can't stop those things, but we can bolster our ability to address stress, which is what it's all about.
Okay, when we were talking about the tea, I asked about other food and drinks. You said no. What I wanted to get at here is other things in the environment that are obvious and easy wins that are negatively impacting the thyroid, whether it be air quality in the home, certain things that are in our environment that we may not be aware of, toxic clothing that are easy enough for us to switch. Well, they don't have to be easy, but things that are having a big impact on the thyroid and adrenals.
All right. Well, I hate plastic. I don't wear polyester. Everything I have is 100% cotton, but polyester is cheaper. If you want to change your wardrobe every couple of months, like many people here do, you're going to end up buying a lot of plastic clothes. I don't think we can. I mean, I'm more worried about there's no more clouds. There's no more cloud cover. It was much hotter this year, even though the temperature was is lower now. The sun is so hot that we're hot. We were hot all the time, more hot than we've ever been. And there was an article that came out recently how the clouds have changed. They used to push the heat up, and now it's just kind of pushing it down, different kind of cloud formations. But I can't do anything about that. So, the air quality, I don't have an air purifier. There's no fluoride in the water here. Somebody who lives where there's fluoride in the water, you definitely want to get a filter. If I had black mold on a wall, I'd remove it, but I wouldn't tear the house down.
All right, Dr. Bright, we're going to end it there for today. We've come up on time. We're going to link up the new book, your website, social media, everything in the show notes. Thank you. Now that you're done, you're going to want to stick around here and catch this other incredible episode. You don't want to miss it. I'll see you over there.
Dispel the myth that keto or carnivore some fad diet. This is literally the oldest diet known to humanity. It cannot be bad for you because the 4 things that humans have been doing for the longest period of time.